welcome to the Workplace Therapy Podcast, the show where we talk about the messy, meaningful, and often misunderstood side of leadership, the human side. I'm your host, Scott Arrieta. I'm the CEO of Unity & Company. At Unity, we partner with mission-driven brands to align their leadership, unlock their culture, and accelerate what's possible. And today's episode is for every woman standing at a career crossroads, wondering if the path that she's been on still fits the leader that she's becoming. And I'm joined today by Hayley Hatfield, a career coach, human capital strategist, and the founder of HayleyHatfield.com. Hayley brings over 15 years of experience leading culture transformation, M&A integration, and organizational change across billion-dollar CPGs, fast-growth startups, and now her own thriving consulting practice. But what makes Hayley's perspective so powerful is that she's in this moment with us. After navigating her own career burnout, she's intentionally evolved her leadership and now helps others to do the same, whether that's inside of corporate systems or outside of it. And so in this conversation, we explore what it means to lead with both strategy and soul, how burnout can be a breakthrough, and why the future of leadership will be built on empathy, innovation, and alignment, not just titles or tenure. So if you're feeling stuck, stretched, or simply ready for something more aligned, this one's for you. You can learn more about Hayley's work, career coaching, culture consulting, and leadership development at HayleyHatfield.com. Hayley, thanks so much for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. So the theme for our conversation today is, do I stay or do I build? A conversation for women at the career crossroads. And I want to start out by asking you, Hayley, you've had a front row seat to both sides of the crossroads, interviewing for senior leadership roles and building your own practice. So can you take us into that moment? What was coming up for you emotionally and professionally when you made that decision?
Yeah, great question. So I think awareness that I kind of wasn't prepared for to be in that world. I have been at a few different roles in my career, but been there for a long time. And so this was very new to me to start interviewing in the current corporate context, which is a completely different conversation of how that has kind of evolved in the last couple of years for corporate roles, people that are looking for a career transition. But what brought me to that was at a stage in my career of understanding what do I want out of my next role? And so, yes, there were things that made me leave my previous role to kind of put me in that mindset. But I took a step back and asked myself, spent a lot of time trying to decide, what do I want to do? This is the time to make a career transition. And what do I really want to focus on? And that's what I primarily was going through. And then I think when I started to apply, realizing I need to narrow that down even more to ensure that I'm not getting myself back into a role that maybe isn't suited for what I want in the future. And a lot of that was that transformational work internally, which I hadn't done for a while because my career just slowly progressed into things that I was adding to the scope of my role in my previous roles.
Yeah. So I'm curious, now you've worked in billion-dollar organizations and startups, and now you're starting your own business. And across all of those spaces, you've seen a pattern with the women that you coach. So what are they asking themselves? And what do you think that says about where we are in this moment right now in leadership?
I think it's that we're transitioning. Sometimes I say with some of my clients and understanding kind of that 35 years old and older and mid-year to seniors in the corporate world of getting out of that Me Too movement. So where we were trying not to be hands-on and empathetic and understand, kind of what our employees were going through. And then that post-COVID of, well, now we need to be a little bit more empathetic leaders. We need to understand what's going on in people's lives when their partners or children are running around in the background. In that time of 2020, 2021, where we were at home and kind of understanding how do we navigate and bring in people's personal experiences. And now it's that post pandemic time of the hybrid working, the flexibility, but people realizing that they did that kind of mindset shift during that time. A lot of people questioned their careers and what they were doing or questioned their leadership. So if they didn't have the opportunity to maybe shift in their careers and find a new role, they are stepping back in a different way of how do they want to show up now? And this is the time that they can help contribute to a culture transformation of where they are. And so I coach leaders on first getting to the root of why they come to me for burnout. Is it that they need a full transition of their career? That takes a lot of conversation to get to the root because we don't forefront with our kind of emotions in some of those conversations. Or do they need to stay where they are at, but make a transition of the type of leader that they're showing up so that they have more impact? A lot of times we talk about work-life balance. I like to say work-life integration. And that's kind of getting to the root of it is if you are making a massive change and looking for a career pivot, how do we talk about that? Or are you just changing in how you show up for your colleagues, your individual contributors, maybe the teams, managers, leaders, whatever role you sit on in that? How are you showing up in a different way? And that can be two different types of conversation, but it takes women around 35 and older a little bit longer to get to that root cause and understanding what they want.
Hmm. That's such a really great observational lens because you're right. If we zoom out and just look at the recent past, there have been some significant shifts in how we interact with and engage with each other just as human beings, just based off of what we've been through. And that has had tremendous impact on the workplace, the way that we as contributors to the workplace see the workplace, but also the way that organizations engage with us as, leaders and employees. That's really interesting. What are some of the common themes that you see from the organizational perspective in which organizations are maybe adapting to these realities in an effective way or maybe a not so effective?
I'd say it depends on the type of organization because the majority of my coaching is women. So understanding where they actually have a seat at the table to make an impact. So if they're staying in the role and having these conversations with their organization, what type of organizations are still mission, vision, value, culture driven? So a lot of things is going on in the context now. Some of that's being removed. So a woman that is being coached to step up for what she believes in and wants to make an impact, it depends on the type of organization that she's a part of. So I have some that are very successful with the tools that we put into place to go and have these difficult conversations and say, hey, this is the way I'm going to show up, but yet I can't just do it on my team. I need it to be holistic around the organization. And then there's some that use the tools and resources and it's shut down, or it's a part of an organization that is still using the old ways of working in different ways. And so that's where it's like, how many times can you try to influence? And then is that when we now pivot to maybe this is time for a career shift? But I think many organizations are prioritizing that because they're seeing the younger generation wants more of that empathetic leadership, flexible work, all these different things that my generation and beyond didn't have to prioritize. But then the other companies are understanding if that's not where you see fit and you've done this transformation work through our coaching to say, this is what I prioritize, then that's where we kind of go back and pivot of, okay, now let's look at a new career transition because that place no longer serves you to be the leader that you want to show up.
And I think the major theme of what I'm hearing is this theme of alignment, right? The recognition that not all organizations are mission, vision, and values driven. Some organizations have pivoted in the post-COVID era to prioritize more on financial results and productivity, and other companies have held firm with the stance that mission, vision, and values are important and they're really living into and growing into their values. And I think the implications there for leaders, as you said, is when you feel yourself in misalignment with your organization's objectives, that facilitates burnout. I think it's Simon Sinek who said one of my favorite quotes, which is that burnout is about working hard at a task that is in misalignment with who you are. So I think it's really important, and I think that's a really great insight that you help women to really understand what are your values? What does alignment look like for you? And are you in an environment where you're square peg in a round hole? Or would you be better served by looking for a different context? So with that as the background, I'd love to ask you, you've described burnout not as failure, but as a beginning, which I think is just a great reframe. So what did that shift look like for you? And why do you think that so many high-performing women miss that signal until it's just too late?
Yeah, we don't know. We don't know what we're looking for. I think, again, I typically that 35 to older age range. And I think that just we are kind of unlearning from our past and we are learning to dive in a little bit deeper to understand ourselves and our emotions and how we react. I am certified in a psychometric tool insight. So I know a little bit more about my personality. That's why I love doing team effectiveness and working with leaders to get that because it's on paper of this is why I react in this way. This is, kind of more my personality. So for me, it took me a little while to realize that my burnout was burnout. I get my motivators by the impact I have on employees and the population. So when I expanded my scope in my last role beyond kind of where I thought I had subject matter expert and where my past and expertise played into it, I was contributing to the employees and seeing the impact. But the long hours and the work that was constantly challenging me in a way that I wasn't looking for my career growth. I love to be challenged and I like to put in the additional work. So I thought I'm doing just what I do when I always take on additional projects that I'm passionate about. And then I realized that the day-to-day grind of what I was doing was giving me the burnout, even though it was having impact on the employee population. So I had to pause and think, "W- why is this different from the additional hours I used to work or projects I used to take on?" And it was because of the type of work, even though it still had impact. So I think as you even said earlier, but I was gaslighting myself that I still have impact on the employees, but it took a while. And then it also took a while for me to realize the physical implication. So I don't have a family after hours that can see that it's draining me. For me, it took a little while of having conversations with family and friends to say, hey, we're not seeing you show up in the same way. So it was a little bit different. So it took me a little while longer. And I actually coached many different women that have different kind of home lives and different things that contribute. And so I think that that was for me is it took me a while to realize when I didn't have those closest to me kind of calling out where they could see the burnout.
Yeah. Oh man, what a great insight. The fact that for women in your situation, not having that mirror of family system that you have to go home to every day can really delay the recognition of, is it too dramatic to call it self-abandonment, disconnecting from the things that really kind of drive you and engage you? And I think that that's really something important that that women in that position can and should reflect on, just taking the space and asking yourself the question of, does this still feel aligned? Does it still feel like I'm filling my cup? Or do I feel like I'm giving more than I'm receiving?
It is, and sorry for interrupting, but I was going to say, I think that that's where, when there are women in my position of where we are corporate work driven, that it may take a little while to notice that. And then it's a little bit too far gone where you're extremely burnout, where you have to make an extreme decision like I did just to exit kind of immediately because it took too long. But because I am driven in this corporate career aspect, that it took me too long to realize.
Sure. I mean, there's got to be a feeling of, man, I've invested so much into this. This is now integrated into my identity, and there must be like a grieving process that's associated with coming to this recognition for yourself that you actually want something different than what you've been pouring yourself into all this time.
Yes. And I'd say the grieving pieces for the first few months of looking for a new role was, wow, my identity is wrapped up in my role in a good way. Again, the work I like to do has impact on employees. So I was able to fill my cup in that way, although my life revolved around my work. But then when you didn't have that, it was kind of this reevaluation of kind of what are my hobbies? What do I enjoy? Because I stopped prioritizing those for so long. And then it became this internal conflict of, is this what I want to get back into? Do I help people kind of navigate this part of the career while I'm in the thick of it? I'm still navigating it. I'm still realizing as an extroverted introvert, the time at home when I'm looking for a role and in between coaching sessions, what is filling my cup? What is giving me that? And that's a lot of kind of relearning who I am and deciding, is it just a time where I'm kind of reassessing it and it's being kind of forefront to me? Or is it time that I make a change and transition? It's not necessarily I don't like that it's my life is wrapped around my job, but like without one, it's a new transition.
Absolutely. Completely new paradigm. One of the things that you mentioned just now is just how easy it is to lose sight of your priorities for yourself, right? And the data shows that women in general, and especially mid-career women and mothers, they're carrying more stress and obligation than ever. And so this issue of prioritization is more important and more relevant than ever. And so what are some of the silent scripts or the inherited beliefs that drive that dynamic?
Yeah. I just listened to a podcast recently on caregivers, sorry, not taking care, giving care. And that was astonishing to me of the amount of women that step into that role. So again, of the 35 and older, you have people that are caregivers to children or aging parents. We get into the perimenopause, menopause. So again, what does that bring into the workforce that maybe your leaders around you don't understand of what you're doing? But that generation of not reaching out and asking for help. So a lot of times it's like, I can do this, I can manage it. I just need to get through this 6 weeks, or this medical issue with my aging parent, or this situation I'm having with my highly sensitive personality child, that you just keep pushing through. And what I learned through that was through my transformational coaching was, if you think you have tools and resources to get to something, maybe those tools and resources no longer serve you. So as someone that has those that I can coach and I can have these conversations and get really deep with someone to get to the root cause of why they're trying to make their career transition or whatnot, as a caregiver and the additional things that you're doing as you're trying to grow your career, do you actually have the tools and resources? And the last thing that people think about, especially women, is let me spend money on a career coach to help have this conversation of the career piece. Let me spend money on, maybe it is a therapist, or maybe is it somebody in the caregiving community that can help you understand what are tools and resources you need you need to take that break and go for a walk, read a book, whatever the things are that fill your cup. And we never think of that because we think this too shall pass. Really quickly, we'll get through this, something that we're working on. And that's just women and of that generation of just pushing it down until you burst and whatever it is. But all those things are added when the majority of times your counterpart that may be male isn't the caregiver, isn't the one taking off early to go be with the kids, isn't the one that's, they push down their emotions too, but they're just not addressing it in the same way. And we don't reach out and ask for help to enhance the tools and resources we have to navigate what we're going through.
Wow, such a great point. I mean, I think that, one of the things that I extracted from what you said is, yes, the gap is real. Like, women are taking on more and more within work and outside of work. They traditionally, historically, and currently, cover a lot more of caregiving responsibilities, both for their immediate family and also for extended family if they're at a stage of life where that becomes a thing that needs to be done. And there's an empathy gap between, male leadership and understanding, what the experience of women actually is in the workplace. And this brings me to one of my favorite things that you say, which is that empathy is a strategy. And I think that hits home for me because that's not how most of us were taught to think about leadership. So can you break down what that means in practice?
Ask how someone's day is. How is their weekend? A simple strategy. But I think that when a lot of times doing team effectiveness and coming in and coaching with leaders is we don't take the time to understand what's going on around the table. So part of those conversations when we're going to an organization to say, yes, the leader maybe thinks 1, 2, and 3 are the issues. We do a needs analysis, do team effectiveness, have these conversations, and we realize kind of like trust and accountability. Well, how do you build trust? So you start to implement things in either this leadership meeting where they're having these conversations, you do offsites where you come together and you do like an insights where you start to realize, hey, these are things that are going on. And a lot of times we do things where you write it on paper, share it, put it in the fire. This is how we bond. But when you go around the room and have somebody explain, what is one thing you wouldn't know about me? You see, a lot of times I say, what's on your screen, your phone screen, what's on the home screen? Tell us what it is. And it's either, yes, a parent that maybe something just happened, children, a dog, a scene that they like. So you start to hear a little bit more. And each day of an offsite, 3 or 4 day offsite, if you start with something in that way, you all of a sudden can relate is, wow, Scott told me about this incident that he dealt with his partner or something happened, that you start to open up a little bit. So then you go back to work and you're trying to implement the things that you maybe have learned in this offsite. And you realize every couple of weeks you're checking in on that person that said, hey, they're dealing with something with their child. And then that's relatable when you come to a disagreement or a massive restructure conversation that you're having to have of saying, hey, there's misalignment here. You're coming with a little bit of empathy to say, I remember what we learned. Or, hey, I know you're more introverted, so let me approach in this way. I know you like data, so let me give you the data. I know you actually like to socialize more. Let's go have a beer and have this conversation. That especially when you're trying to get a point across or give feedback or a difficult conversation, you can relate that in. And it's so much harder if we don't give leaders that environment. So again, the kind of offsite team effectiveness, because that generally sets it up. In addition to ongoing, that's the coaching. Because some people, it's like, oh, I shared and now it keeps being brought up and I wish I hadn't have shared something. So that's kind of that ongoing coaching piece, which in data, it's harder for men to do that. So that's why in coaching women is you show the safe space by bringing that every meeting after you've had that initial kind of time together. How can I show by in the way that I want others to show up and bringing more empathy to those conversations?
Hmm. I think those are such important points. And I feel like as human beings, we intuitively understand the benefits of this, right? We all like to be seen. We all like to be empathized with. We all like it when people demonstrate an understanding of the uniqueness of our situation and tailor the way that they engage with us with that understanding in mind. The objection that I hear most commonly is we don't have time for that, as if it's an efficiency-based argument. Why do you think that that idea is so pervasive in spite of all of the experiential and empirical evidence that suggests otherwise?
So you ended on we can present data to show how this is effective. It is the generational gap that's in the organization. So the people that are making those decisions fundamentally to their core have been grown up in the corporate environment. Number one, there's a pyramid. You never go above your boss, to make a decision or do something. You don't bring in empathy. You come to work, you leave when you can, or leave it at the door, all your problems when you come into work, and the same thing when you go home. And they're not transitioning to, yes, maybe those people aren't the ones that are directly speaking to the new generation that's in, those individual contributors, early career that are coming in, and maybe they don't see, again, how they are much more empathetic and how they approach things, what they want. I've seen something, they're like an atom molecule. Like they'll definitely go in there above their boss's head to go to the CEO's office, and it's like, we're like, oh, that's so crazy to think about. But I think it's because who they are leading are the ones that some of them are challenging the norms right now. So again, kind of this 35 and older are saying, I'm rethinking my personal life of therapy and unlearning what I knew from my past. So I'm bringing that into the organization. And it's just right now we're at that weird straddle of that the leadership generation is not as attuned to this idea. When those managers, we've trained people on empathy for new managers, those people are having great conversations with their individual contributors that are reporting into them because they can relate so much more. So it's like, how do you kind of handhold right now I think it's just like innate in those leaders make up their bones to second guess. And that's why I think like more and more leaders coming to the table of bringing that and showing that it's impactful is how you slowly kind of make that influence, because there's not enough data in the world to influence somebody that has been brought up in their career to think it's black and white.
Well, and I think you bring up such a great point when you call out the cultural or the generational gap, right? Like the ideas that, pervaded, each generation have been fairly distinct. And when you overlay the advancement of technology over that same time period, what you realize is it's not just the kind of incremental change in generational expectations that it has been in maybe generations past, but the baby boomer generation versus the millennial generation, like there are significant differences and underpinnings in their lived experience in the economic contract, right? Between how many hours you put into work and what the reward, like what is it that you can actually expect for that investment. And now with Gen Z entering the fray, even more so, right? With Gen Z trying to break out into these positions. And so as the economic contract on the whole or on the average actually gives people less value while requiring more productivity and more of them, it's no wonder that some people are pushing back and trying to find balance in this world, right? Because, you can no longer survive on a single income and buy a house and 2 cars and have your partner stay at home with your 2.3 kids and your golden retriever, right? Like the reality of today's situation is that it's much more of a grind. And I think what people are finding is I can't stay disconnected from myself and my own priorities and my hopes and dreams for my life for as long as this corporation would like to utilize me, in that way. So I think that women are leading the charge when it comes to this awareness, right? And from your perspective, you work a lot with women leaders. So I would love to get your perspective on what are you seeing in your coaching work about how women are leading differently in response to all of these things that we've been talking about, and how do those shifts show up in results for the naysayers in the audience and not just relationships?
So I think I'd say how it's showing up, it's difficult to quantify and repeat back because I'm in the setting where they're coming to me and having these conversations. And so as we talked about earlier, it's a little bit difficult to kind of self-identify. So it's also building the muscle of, hey, how are you showing up in this way? How do you feel confident when you leave? So my intention is to grow them as a person, unless I'm working with a group and an organization. But a lot lately it's been individual coaching. So I don't get to see how they actually show up. So I actually have to challenge more and more in my conversations of what was present, what were conversations, how do you feel the message landed when you were facilitating this kind of conversation? Because again, the tools and resources aren't naturally there for this group of clients that I coach. So I'd say that I'm hearing that it's a battle because it is a new way of thinking for a lot of my clients. Again, of kind of unlearning and relearning. So how you show up. A simple practice is the woman on Wall Street with her hands on her hips. How are you going into the conversation and kind of demanding that seat at the table to have that conversation? It's more often than not, I have conversations with women that say they are trying to go in and make a point around the table and they don't feel like they're heard. They're spoken over. Someone can, kind of rephrase the same thing and be heard in a different way. So a lot of it is just small actions of standing up and making clear communication of what you need around the table, because these are leaders that have male and female counterparts, across the table. And so it's slowly making micro changes like that for each individual client that I'm coaching. I don't get to see on the back end, but I get to see them coming back and say, you wouldn't believe what I said. One said, I walked in and had my laptop on one arm, but kept my other arm on my hip. It's a small thing, or where you sit across the table. When you're in a conversation, that's not typically something men think about, but I had someone that was interviewing someone. It was very clear of, hey, I need to be at this seat rather than this seat. And the CEO is asking, what does that matter? Like, well, you don't know how you have to come in and be clear of how do you have to, is your seat higher? Is it lower? Are you across the table? Are you next to them? And so some of that is transitioning what I'm hearing from my clients in addition to how they show up in the workplace. And it goes back to the beginning as it depends on the type of organization. And so after multiple conversations and that you're trying to do better, are you seeing an impact? Then you see that this is the organization for you and they want to see that change, that culture transformation. If it's not, you've done the work, you tried to make it better, you tried to stay where you were, and you are in turn evolving who you are, and that place no longer serves you. But that takes a little bit of multiple challenges to step up and try in different ways.
Such a great important point about really fighting for that seat at the table and not allowing yourself to be marginalized, making your voice heard, and then finally making the decision. It's if there's not openness and receptivity to that, to look elsewhere rather than to continue to gaslight yourself into saying, this is fine. If I just have one more conversation, go through this one project, this next meeting, maybe things will resolve itself. And I think holding that internal boundary and internal standard for yourself is really an important North Star to navigating your career without abandoning yourself in the process.
For sure. But that's where I think it's hard for people to set that North Star. So you have to get there and kind of navigate that conversation first to define what is your new North Star. You may have done something 10 years ago in your career. That may be something, it maybe look different now of what your North Star is.
That's such a great point, Hayley. But kind of used to be, if we're talking about the generational differences, right? So for the boomer generation and to a lesser extent, Gen X, your job was your career, right? That was your identity. You got a job as an engineer and you're an engineer moving forward. You got a job in operations. Maybe you'll have different levels of seniority within operations, but you're the operations guy or gal, right? And in today's world, it seems to be that more and more people are willing to reevaluate the stage of life that they're in and come to radically different conclusions about what that means for how I make money. You know what I'm saying? And so I think like it is really important to have somebody like you in their corner saying, it's okay. Like, I know that, like, you know, there are vestiges of cultural expectation that will tell you that you need to stay put, but who is that serving really? Like, and, you know, don't abandon yourself in this process, because it's okay to rewrite your own story, just given how rapidly the context in which we live is changing.
Right. I love that, because one thing that I do is ask my clients to say, what do you enjoy? What makes you happy? What are your strengths? What are some opportunities? Then what roles actually meet those? And that could change every 5 to 10 years. Definitely post COVID, a lot of people reevaluating, but then you say, wow, these are the things I like to do. I like to have impact on employees. So again, back to our previous conversation, it took me a little while to realize burnout because I was still having that impact. But then where are things that I'm good at? Where are some opportunities, and what roles are there out there that connect to your strengths and the things that you like? And it could be completely different in operations. It could be a version of operations, but more on the people side, because you realize you haven't managed people in a really long time. But like, we don't pause enough to think of that because you're having to have 2 jobs or whatever it is. And so that's where at least having an external person have that conversation, it just makes you rethink that. What if you're exactly where you need to be? Okay, then we need to work on that work-life integration, other ways to get you fulfilled in that burnout. But this could bring a totally different path. And then we have to navigate, well, what does that look like to fully transition? But those questions, really taking time over a few weeks, glass of wine, or out in nature, whatever you like to do, to really think through those, because we're not forced to think about that for ourselves.
Yes, the importance of creating space so you can actually hear your own voice, and the importance of taking a partner like yourself to really be a mirror and really help to reflect back to you like what it is that's important to you is just so important. And so I love these examples of how you help leaders move from reactivity to intentionality. So from overwork to really identifying your own boundaries. And so I'm curious though, like, what does that journey actually look like for women who are in the messy middle of that transition?
Yeah, I think it's case by case basis, because again, it's creating that safe space to have a vulnerable conversation, which a lot of us are not doing. In my transformational coaching, we start here with a question, and what's bothering you today? Or, hey, I've had this difficult issue with, my boss at work or something. Then you go and all of a sudden it's like, well, it's because I don't feel safe when someone disagrees with my opinion because of something happened when I was a child. So, which I know is a lot of kind of the leadership coaching that you and your team do as well. So I think that that's, again, multiple conversations, but I advertise it in a career coaching setting rather than a therapy-ish or something like that, because we don't realize our innate responses to things, how they go back to something very particular. So I think it depends on, again, do you not trust men in leadership roles? So that's okay. Now we've got to back up. Do we start at manager level, individual contributors, where you're engaging with people and having these conversations? Is it just that you don't ever feel like you're respected around the table? What are small ways that you can interject ideas? So it kind of depends on what the root cause is. And that can take a couple of sessions to understand. Each time you say, oh, I just need a plan to get a new job and have my career shift. Like, no, why are you shifting, and doing that? And so that creates that safe space in those conversations, which I think is unique because of my learning and development coaching background, of some of those psychometric tools that I have. I can at least pull that down a lot quicker, maybe in some of those conversations. And then what is the long-term strategy? Because I'm looking for that overall transformation. So it's going to contribute to your career, but it's your personal as well. And then it's in turn, because of the type of women that I'm coaching, is going to help make you a better leader in your career transition or pivot or new role. So it just kind of depends on the strategy and the root cause of that funnel, how we navigate.
Yeah, and it really just strikes me how often or how common it is for people not to have full awareness of what that root cause is for themselves. And so again, this is one of those scenarios where taking a partner to kind of be a reflection to you and ask you the questions can be really, really helpful, because I think like the natural human tendency Like a lot of these beliefs that drive our actions and keep us stuck are really rooted in something that was traumatic or hurtful in our past. And so I think that a lot of us don't like to sit with the discomfort of processing that. And so we move forward and take other people's expectations on as our own. And then to the point that we've been talking about over our whole conversation, eventually you end up just so disconnected and misaligned with who you are that you don't really have that North Star anymore, and you need to rediscover it, right? And I do think that we are entering this phase of rediscovery and personal alignment for just massive amounts of people, but for women in general who are leading the charge in so many ways, they're probably feeling the stress fractures of that misalignment more acutely than maybe any other group.
hmm Yeah, and I'd say in the corporate setting too, again, the newer generation coming in are more likely to bring their authentic self into work. And they'll say, I have issues with this, or, I'm emotional about this or something. That's a bit extreme to hope that they'll actually say that. But I think that that's the point is this generation that I'm coaching is say they are doing the work outside of work and they're going to therapy, but it stops at when you walk into the door with this generation of, oh, that also could impact how I'm reacting in the corporate world. And again, it's just that mindset of that black and white. It's not. So like that's why advertising career coaching and the things that you need to level up in that next level, because you may just be rethinking something. Those of my clients that do go to therapy, it's not like you never guess what my therapist said. It's the same thing. It's what we're going on here. It's like, wow.
Exactly.
But it's just a
Go
different
figure.
approach. Yeah.
Absolutely. Man. Well, so I want to take a little bit of a, maybe not a left turn, but a step to the side here, because I want to acknowledge that there's a growing movement of women leaving traditional leadership paths, and they are seeking to create something more aligned. But what do you say about the woman who's listening, who's on the edge, but is just scared to leap because they can't break free of these constructs that keep her stuck?
I'd say reach out to a coach to have a conversation, because I think bouncing the ideas off of it, you realize you're probably internalizing that more. Or you're having a conversation with a partner that is, of course, that financial connection too. So you're probably not getting full support in your conversation because you are having to weigh financial. I'd say it is a leap of faith in the current market. I've never been happier and more proud of taking the step away for what didn't serve me. Hey, it's a rocky road to start. It's difficult to start fresh and put yourself out there. So that's kind of the biggest takeaway is, are you prepared for that? But I'd say first go through these steps of joys, strengths, opportunities, what kind of roles. So maybe not corporate roles, but what kind of opportunities would you think to go out on your own? I had to think of, I want to have impact on people. I prefer that one-on-one conversation. So coaching was an easy path to me to say, hey, I've already done this a lot and through my consulting roles within organizations. So it was a obvious kind of decision of where I was going. But I think it's mostly if you make that decision or you're thinking about it, talking to someone that can help guide you and set up a strategy. So I would advise in this current market of the world, don't decide and pack up and leave right now, unless it's a very toxic environment. Then, we kind of talk through that. But to at least talk to someone to get a strategy. What are things you can do every day, every week that get you to that step to where you feel comfortable, not just leaving, because I think a lot of people have to have a lot of financial support to leave, but you could start doing things in your current environment. I coached somebody recently that wants to get into more kind of leadership awareness, leadership development. No aspect of their role right now, very technical role in sales. And so I was saying, what are ways? She's like, yeah, we do a sales group offsite training. Okay, well, what are ways that you can help support in that training? Reach out to the person that typically, organizes it. What are ways that you can, how you're doing, delivering, managing your direct reports? What are strategies you're putting in place that you could advertise to the regional salespeople that they're doing? So where do you start to tick away at filling your cup in this new idea that you have in your current work? Number one, that prolongs probably the burnout that was coming because you're adding impact to what you're doing and what you want to do. So you're working those additional hours, but it's fulfilling your cup in a different way. So I think it kind of depends on the situation, but I would say have a conversation externally, someone that doesn't know you directly and can kind of encourage you to get a strategy, baby steps to get to that big decision of how you want to transition out of the corporate world into something on your own.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And as you mentioned earlier at the top of our conversation, a lot of people don't really think about getting that kind of support. But the reason that it's so valuable and so necessary is because a lot of people don't realize we've internalized things that sound like our voice, but they're not our voice. The voice that you're gaslighting yourself with, it sounds like you, it looks like you in your mind's eye, but it didn't originate from you. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people really need help deciphering is which voice is my true authentic voice that I've been suppressing in order to maximize the results or outcomes from a misaligned opportunity, right? And now this other more toxic voice that is keeping me small and is keeping me stuck actually feels like my voice, but it's not. And so helping people distinguish between those things, I think, is one of the primary pieces of value that a coach can actually give.
Yeah. And I say that unfortunately the toxic voice has the megaphone. So first, how do we realize it? Put down the megaphone and, have a muffled microphone over that. Like you can't always squash it. It's always going to be there. But in the moment, tools and resources, how do you pivot when you hear that voice talking to take away the megaphone and go to the positive side of them?
I have friends that have come to the decision to name the toxic voice, right? And so they'll say, "Listen, Brian, I don't need you right now. Like you can just sit down, put the microphone down, let me talk to me."
For a lot of women, it became Karen in the recent environment.
Listen,
it's like,
Karen.
listen, Karen, no.
Well, this has been such a great conversation, Hayley. I want to end with just a couple of reflection questions for our listeners to sit with. So let's go a little bit further downstream, right? So we talked about the woman who's on the edge, like scared to make the leap, but has made that decision. Let's talk about somebody a little bit earlier in the timeline, right? So if someone's feeling the nudge that something's not working, what should they ask themselves first?
Are you feeling unsettled? That is a huge question, though. Can be so broad. And that's where, again, I don't think that corporate women in the workforce, when they are dealing with caregiving, children and aging parents, et cetera, think to prioritize themselves in that why. But I'd say maybe go back to when you accepted the role, maybe a role or at a new company. What made you excited to be there? Why were you trying to show up in your best way to prove yourself in that way? What have you lost since then? What kind of spark? What kind of passion? So maybe the company's changed. So good. This is a great time to reevaluate. The company is not performing as well, or the company is a different shape, was part of M&A and it changed. Okay. So maybe the culture made a shift. Rethink that. Is it you were given a promotion and now you no longer are connected to your teams, or you're doing more strategic work and not doing technical work? What are things that you can just kind of reevaluate is what's changed in the 3, 5, 10 years since I maybe started this role or at this company. And then that could bring small aha moments of like, oh, this is what it is. Now I just sit in leadership meetings all the time and I don't like talking about it. I like doing the work, or I'm not connected to my team because now they're remote. Like there are just ways, but you really have to kind of sit with that and understand what are the aha moments and then take a step back and what are you going to do about that?
It seems obvious and intuitive, but the truth is like too many people actually don't engage in that activity. It's not because I don't even think that people don't think it's important. I think it's because the changes that happen so incrementally, so imperceptibly, that one day you wake up and you're like, listen, the contract that I signed here, the things that I thought I was getting out of this are no longer in alignment with what I have to give, right? And I mean, it doesn't help that organizationally, the organizational incentive is to say everything's fine, right? Like they don't want to lose you either. But I do think it's so important to constantly have your finger on the pulse of yourself and like how you're feeling within that work context, and give yourself the permission to evaluate, is this still working for me?
Right. And I think unfortunately as women and of this generation are saying, I should be grateful for the promotion. I should be grateful for the seat at the table. And so they're definitely not stepping back and asking why, because they had to fight for it more than their counterparts. So they had to fight to sit there. And now they're like, this is weird. I'm more separated from the work. I don't really like this. Or, around the table, I realized, I held this leadership team to a different higher standard. And now I'm here and I see the ways of working, but it's like, that's also a big complex for women of like, I fought hard or I was given or I earned it or whatever, and you're there and you hate to step back and challenge, but that's where we're having to reassess that culture alignment.
And I think the reframe is women have deserved and been highly qualified for these positions all along, right? And you can be grateful and still enter the room as if you deserve to be there. And I think like that's not only the best thing for the organization, but it's the best thing for yourself as well, so that you can leave with confidence and clarity and alignment with yourself. And there's no scenario in which that doesn't just produce outcomes that lift the tide of all ships, in the organization.
For sure. But as full transparency, as someone that's still navigating that, thank you for calling out of I never even said deserve in my response. So see, this is still of us unlearning and still, prioritizing that I deserve a seat at this table and have this conversation, but I didn't even use that positive language of that women deserve it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the reframe. It's about the stories you tell yourself, right? All right, so final closing question for you, because I love the world of leadership that you're helping to build here. And so I'd just love to leave our audience with your vision of what that looks like. What does a more human, more innovative mode of leadership look like to you? What is it that you're fighting for?
Yeah, I'd say first and foremost, equality. So what that looks like around the table, and that's being challenged in different ways lately. And so I think that for me, a fast growing or just growing innovative company is going to have that equality around the table and encourage that diversity of thought in whatever way that looks. And to encourage authentic leadership in a way that people feel the space is safe to challenge the conversation. Now, part of that is learning how to challenge in a productive way, in a constructive way, not just to challenge authority, but again, the thought that's in the room. But I think first and foremost, we need to have equitable and diversity across the table.
Well, Hayley, thank you so much for just all of the insights you've shared and just for your advocacy of women and leadership and the permission that you give all of us really to consider whether or not we are living lives that are in alignment with ourselves and just how important that is. So that's it for today's episode of the Workplace Therapy Podcast. If Hayley's story has resonated with you, or if you find yourself at your own career crossroads, I hope this conversation reminded you, you're not alone. You're not stuck. Leadership doesn't have to mean self-sacrifice. It can mean alignment, agency, and a new way forward. And so, Hayley, before we close, if somebody wants to reach out to you directly and inquire about working with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, thanks. I'd say my website, Hayley, Hayley, Hatfield, like Hatfield and McCoy, so HayleyHatfield.com. And I think just my last words are, I hope something resonated with you today. If not, leave the rest behind. Just take that one thing that resonated with you.
Great advice. And I'd just like to add, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with somebody who might need it. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you all next time.